Money always looks permanent, until the moment it isn't. Every empire, every government, every generation believes the currency in their hands is real, stable, and guaranteed. But history tells a harsher truth. Money is not controlled by politicians, central banks, or even the people who print it. It is controlled by laws, old laws, laws that repeat across centuries, no matter who is in power. These laws aren't written in constitutions or economics textbooks. They were discovered the hard way in collapsing empires, runaway inflation, failed currencies, and broken promises. And every time a society ignores them, the result is the same. Wealth evaporates, savings die, and power shifts from ordinary citizens to whoever understands the rules beneath the surface. Most people today think money is random, that inflation just happens, that recessions are unfortunate accidents, that the rich get richer because of luck or corruption alone. But the truth is deeper, colder, and more predictable. Money follows patterns, and those patterns decide who rises, who falls, and who is left holding worthless paper when the system breaks. This is the story of the forgotten laws of money, laws that shaped the fall of Rome, the bankruptcy of Spain, the rise of England, the rule of the dollar, the crisis of 2008, and the erosion of your savings today. And once you see how these laws work, you will never look at money or power the same way again. The first law appeared 5 centuries ago, discovered not by a banker or a king, but by a frustrated advisor watching a nation destroy itself with its own currency. It became known as Gresham's Law. Bad money drives out good. At first glance, it sounds like a simple observation, but it explains everything from hoarded gold in ancient temples to Bitcoin today. The law is simple. When a society has 2 forms of money, one trusted and one declining in value, people will spend the bad money and save the good. Gold disappears into vaults, silver disappears into pockets, and the cheap, declining currency becomes the only one people use in public. The government can declare that both forms of money are equal by law, but the people decide which one is equal in reality. It happened in ancient Rome, when emperors diluted silver coins to fund the army. Citizens began melting down the old high silver denarii and hiding them. It happened in the Ottoman Empire, when copper-filled coins circulated in the streets while the wealthy stored real silver at home. It happened in the 16th century, when Spain flooded Europe with silver from the New World, but prices rose so fast that real purchasing power collapsed. And it is happening again today. When people don't trust the currency in their pocket, they look for something stronger: dollars instead of pesos, gold instead of paper, crypto instead of banks. Gresham's Law isn't a theory, it's a survival instinct. But the second law explains who gets wealthy during every crisis and who gets crushed. This is the Cantillon effect, discovered in the 1700s. Long before anyone invented inflation charts or central banks, Cantillon noticed something disturbing. When money is created, the people who receive it first get richer, and the people who receive it last get poorer. In other words, inflation is not equal. It is a transfer of wealth, not an accident of economics. When a king minted more coins, the court, the army, and the suppliers spent the new money at old prices. By the time the money reached the village and the marketplace, prices had already risen. The poor paid the bill for wealth that someone else had already absorbed. The same pattern exists now, but scaled across the entire global economy. When central banks print money, the first recipients are not workers, students, or savers. They are banks, corporations, governments, and asset markets. The money hits stocks, bonds, real estate, private equity, not groceries, wages, or savings accounts. By the time the newly created money reaches the average person, the cost of housing, food, and energy has already risen faster than their income. This is why the wealthy get wealthier during financial crises. It's not a mystery, it's a law. Money printing doesn't create prosperity, it rearranges wealth. And every empire that has ignored this law has ended the same way, with social unrest, falling currencies, and governments desperately searching for control. But the third law reveals what happens when governments try to control the system instead of fix it. Goodhart's law. When a measure becomes a target, it stops being a good measure. When a government tries to manage the economy by focusing on a single number, inflation, unemployment, GDP, interest rates, the number becomes corrupted. It stops reflecting reality and starts becoming manipulated. This is why official inflation numbers always seem lower than what people feel. It's why employment numbers rise even when people are working fewer hours for less money. It's why GDP grows even when debt and living costs explode. Governments measure the economy not to report the truth, but to maintain confidence. And in a debt-based system, confidence is oxygen. Once it's gone, the whole structure collapses. That brings us to the most dangerous law of all, the law that decides the fate of global reserve currencies. The law that destroyed the British pound, threatens the US dollar, and guarantees that no reserve currency lasts forever. Triffin's paradox. To lead the world, a currency must be abundant. But the more abundant it becomes, the weaker it becomes. A global reserve currency must be printed and sent overseas to fund trade, wars, investment, and debt, but printing too much eventually destroys trust in the currency's value. Britain learned this in the 1920s. The United States is learning it now. America must print dollars to run the global financial system, but printing dollars destroys purchasing power at home. The world gets the benefit of liquidity. Americans get the cost of inflation. This is why every reserve currency in history has eventually collapsed, not because of war or weakness, but because success required self-destruction. These laws are not opinions. They are patterns that run like software beneath every financial system on Earth. They explain why gold always returns when paper fails, why housing becomes unaffordable during money creation, why every bailout enriches the top, why debt grows faster than growth itself, and why every empire thinks it is the exception until it isn't. These laws are not taught in school. They are not explained by politicians. They are not discussed on news networks. Because once you understand them, you see the financial world clearly, and the illusion of control disappears. You see that inflation is not a mistake. It is a policy. You see that debt is not temporary. It is structural. You see that wealth is not lost, it is transferred. And you see that every financial crisis is simply the next chapter in a script that has never changed. Because the real story of money isn't about numbers. It's about power. And power always protects itself first. If the forgotten laws of money were only ancient curiosities, they wouldn't matter. But they are alive today, not in theory, but in policy, debt markets, central banks, bank accounts, and shrinking paychecks. The rules that once destroyed empires are now embedded in modern economics, disguised by new language, digital systems, and political narratives. The world looks more advanced, but the mechanisms of wealth and collapse are the same. The cycle always begins with confidence. Every financial system must convince its citizens that the currency they use is stable, valuable, and permanent. That belief is the foundation. But belief alone isn't enough. It must be reinforced by force, law, and habit. Rome stamped the emperor's face on every coin. Spain stamped the royal crest into New World silver. Britain declared its pound as good as gold. The United States stamped "In God We Trust" onto paper money issued after abandoning its gold standard. The message is always the same. Trust the system. The value is guaranteed. But what guarantees value is not the stamp. It is scarcity, productivity, and confidence. Once a currency becomes too abundant, too manipulated, or too detached from real production, the laws begin to surface. The decay is slow at first, then sudden. Spain learned this the hard way. In the 1500s, it discovered unimaginable silver mines in South America, rivers of wealth. The Spanish crown believed it had unlocked permanent prosperity, a monopoly on the world's financial future. Silver galleons arrived by the ton, flooding Europe with money that no other empire could produce. But Gresham's law was already waiting. The silver did not create wealth. It created price inflation, corruption, and dependency. Spain didn't invest in agriculture, education, manufacturing, or self-sufficiency. It spent the silver on war, palace, life, and foreign goods. The silver passed through Spain like water, enriching its rivals, the bankers of Genoa, the merchants of Amsterdam, the shipbuilders of England. Spain mistook money for wealth, and the mistake was fatal. By the time the mines dried, the empire was drowning in debt, inflation, and war. The silver that was supposed to secure power instead funded the rise of its competitors. The empire richest in treasure became the empire poorest in structure. The same mistake echoes now, except instead of silver galleons, the world runs on credit, bonds, and digital money. Instead of Spain's treasure fleets, we have central bank balance sheets. And instead of physical silver, we have debt infinite, expanding, and treated as wealth. Until the moment it isn't. The United States today issues more debt each year than Spain ever mined. The difference is only one of format, not function. Empires always believe the good times will last. They always believe their currency is special. They always believe they can print, borrow, or conquer their way out of decline. But the laws don't care what the empire believes. The Cantillon effect explains why every nation that prints money sees wealth inequality explode. The first recipients of newly created money always benefit the most in Rome. It was the army. In France, the aristocracy. In Britain, the merchant banks. In the United States, the financial sector, hedge funds, and politically connected corporations. When the Federal Reserve prints money, trillions enter the system through Wall Street, not through payrolls, pensions, or savings accounts. The money lifts asset prices first, stocks, real estate, private equity, and only then trickles into the rest of the economy, long after prices have already risen. So ordinary people don't just get left behind, they pay for the rise of others. Their wages lag behind inflation, their savings by less every year. Their rent rises faster than their income. The game is not broken, it is working exactly as the laws predict. Goodhart's law explains why governments can never fix the system by targeting a number. Every inflation target becomes a political tool. Every unemployment statistic becomes an illusion. Every interest rate becomes a fragile compromise between debt survival and economic pain. The moment the metric becomes the mission, the metric becomes the lie. This is why every financial crisis is blamed on unpredictable events, oil shocks, housing bubbles, viruses, geopolitics, as if the system had no internal design. But crises aren't glitches. They are pressure valves. When you build an economy on artificial numbers, artificial money, and artificial stability, collapse is just math waiting for its moment. That brings us to the most dangerous stage, when a government begins losing control of confidence. When people start converting money into anything else: land, gold, foreign currency, crypto, goods, even food. When saving becomes impossible and spending becomes defense. When trust dies, every currency collapse in history followed that moment. Rome's silver turned to bronze. France's assignats collapsed into worthlessness. Weimar Germany printed banknotes faster than they could be carried. Argentina redenominated its currency 5 times. Zimbabwe turned trillion-dollar bills into souvenirs. The pattern was never hyperinflation happened. The pattern was always trust broke first, money broke second. The economy broke last. That is why understanding the laws matters not as theory, but as preparation. The world today is at the crossroads of every law converging at once. Bad money is pushing good money underground again. Newly created money is enriching insiders first. Economic metrics no longer reflect reality. Global reserve currency status is cracking under its own weight. The forgotten laws aren't warnings, they are forecasts. But every collapse also reveals something else, something the schools, media, and financial class don't teach. When the system breaks, Only real value survives. Not paper value, not digital promises, not political guarantees. What survives are skills, land, production, energy, relationships, tools, and assets that do not rely on permission or confidence. The people who understand the laws before the collapse are not wealthy by luck, they are wealthy by design. They know that money is not wealth. They know that prices are signals of distortion. They know that saving in a debasing currency is a trap. And they know that every empire tells its citizens the same lie. This time is different. It is never different. And the laws always win. The last law is not economic. It is psychological. The law that explains why every collapse feels sudden, even though the warning signs were visible for years. The law that turns quiet decay into public panic. The law that flips a society from obedience to desperation overnight. The law of last confidence. When trust in money breaks, it breaks all at once. For years, sometimes decades, people adapt, tolerate, ignore, or deny the decline. They complain, but they comply. They accept rising prices, shrinking paychecks, higher taxes, and growing debt because the alternative feels impossible. But then, something changes. A spark, a shock, a moment when the population, the markets, or the world finally realizes the system will not fix itself. In the Roman Empire, that moment was when soldiers refused to accept the emperor's debased coins as payment. The army, once loyal, became mercenary payment in gold, not silver. Rome fell, not just to barbarians, but to inflation and lost trust. In France, during the Revolution, paper money called assignats was printed to solve every financial problem until no one would accept them. People demanded real goods, gold, or foreign currency. The economy didn't collapse when the paper lost value. It collapsed when the people decided it had no value at all. In the Weimar Republic, inflation was rising for months, even years, but life continued. Then one day, the currency died. Not through numbers, but through belief. Shops closed not because prices were high, but because shopkeepers refused to sell at any price. Trust evaporated, and with it, the system. And today, the world is closer to that point than most people realize. For the first time in history, every major currency on earth is backed by nothing, printed in excess, and tied to political survival. Every government depends on debt to function. Every central bank depends on confidence to prevent collapse. Every citizen depends on the illusion that the system is stable. But the laws don't care about illusions. Gresham's law is visible in real time. People in unstable economies hoard dollars, crypto, gold, real assets, not their own currency. The good money is already disappearing. The Cantillon effect is no longer hidden. Asset prices rise while wages stagnate, and those closest to the money printer become billionaires overnight. Goodhart's law is undeniable. Governments declare inflation under control while food, housing, and energy costs rise faster than the official data admits. Trifin's paradox is now global news. The US dollar must be printed to sustain the world economy, but printing destroys its value at home. A reserve currency cannot survive both global obligation and domestic stability, and history has never produced an exception. And the final law, the law of confidence, is already cracking. The world's greatest risk is not default, or recession, or war. It is the moment when people stop believing their money will hold value tomorrow. That moment changes everything. That is why this history matters, not as a warning of doom, but as a map for survival. Because every collapse has two kinds of people. Those who thought money was wealth, and those who knew wealth was never money. When the Roman currency collapsed, landowners survived. When the Spanish Empire drowned in inflation, merchants and shipbuilders rose. When Britain lost the pound's reserve status, those with global assets kept power. When every paper currency collapses, those with mobility, production, and hard assets rebuild. The real lesson of the forgotten laws is simple. Money is temporary. Wealth is not. Money can be printed. Wealth must be built. Money can be devalued. Wealth must be defended. Money can collapse overnight. Wealth survives collapse. Every empire told its citizens the same story. Your savings are safe. Your currency is strong. Your leaders are in control. Until the day they weren't. The world today is repeating every pattern. Rising debt, shrinking currency value, manipulated metrics, widening inequality, and growing political denial. But those who study the laws are never surprised. They know that every system has a breaking point, and every breaking point is an opportunity. Not for everyone, but for those who prepared before the collapse. Because the truth is this. The laws of money don't predict disaster. They predict who will own the future once the disaster clears. And that future does not belong to people who simply save money. It belongs to people who understand money. To those who know the difference between value and price, between wealth and currency, between assets and promises, between what can be printed and what cannot. That is why this knowledge is not just financial education, it is self-defense. Because governments won't warn you. Banks won't teach you. Schools don't explain it. And the people who benefit most from the laws staying hidden have no interest in revealing them. But once you understand them, you cannot unsee them. You see why gold returns every time paper fails. You see why the rich buy assets while the poor save currency. You see why inflation is not a side effect, but a strategy. You see why debt keeps growing, even when the economy doesn't. You see why no empire in history has ever survived its own money system. And you understand the question every citizen of every empire eventually faces. Do you trust the currency, or do you trust the laws? Because only one of them has survived every collapse.